The valley lay wide and barren, its earth scorched by a relentless sun. Cottonwoods stood sparse along the dry creek, their leaves trembling in the heat. A single house crouched at the valley's edge, its gray boards peeling, roof sagging like an old man's shoulders. Behind it, a garden sprawled, dead, tangled with brittle weeds and thorns, a relic of a woman long gone. Jacob sat on the porch, his boots crusted with dirt. 42 years had carved lines deep into his face, his eyes gray as the slate cliffs beyond. His hands, broad and scarred, rested on a rifle across his knees. He didn't hunt anymore. The gun was habit, like the ache in his chest. By the well, a cedar plank bore her name, Clara, etched 7 years ago, now weathered to a whisper. Hoofbeats stirred the dust. A cart creaked up the path, pulled by a mule with ribs sharp under its hide. A woman stepped down, young, no older than 25. Her dress was faded blue, patched at the hem. A straw hat shaded her face, but her eyes, green, steady, met his. She carried a satchel, worn leather cracking at the seams. She knocked on the porch post. Once. Soft where Jacob didn't move. His fingers tightened on the rifle. She waited, hands clasped, her shadow long across the dirt. Finally, he jerked his head toward the garden. No words. She nodded, walked past him, her boots scuffing the earth. Dawn broke cold, the sky bruised purple. She was already in the garden, kneeling, her fingers sifting through dry soil. She worked with a quiet rhythm, pulling weeds, stacking them in neat piles. Her breath clouded in the air. A spade flashed in her hand, biting into the ground, turning it over like a secret. Jacob watched from the porch, coffee tin gripped tight. The steam curled upward, ignored. Her name was Hannah, the trader had said. No family. No past. Just hands that knew dirt. He didn't ask more. Didn't care. A crow landed on the fence post, its claws scratching wood. She paused, looked at it, reached into her satchel, tossed a crust of bread. The bird pecked, wary. She smiled, faint, then turned back to the soil. Jacob's jaw clenched. He stood, boots heavy, and went inside. The door thudded shut. Days bled into one another. She came at dawn, left at dusk. The garden changed under her hands. Furrows appeared, straight and deep. Seeds went into the earth, covered with care. She drove stakes for beans, tied them with twine from her satchel. Her humming drifted on the wind, a tune soft and unfamiliar, like a lullaby half-remembered. Jacob chopped wood, the axe splitting logs with a crack that echoed. He didn't look at her, but he saw the bucket she left by the woodpile, water sloshing inside. He drank, the cold sharp against his throat. Set the bucket down without a glance. One evening, she sat by the garden's edge, her hands dark with soil. A firefly blinked near her knee. She cupped it, its light pulsing in her palms. Released it, watched it climb into the dusk. Jacob stood in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the porch. Their eyes met. Hers held no questions, no fear. She looked away, brushed dirt from her skirt, and stood. He turned inside. The fire in the hearth was low. He didn't stoke it. The first frost came early, silvering the grass. Hannah worked faster, her breath visible, fingers red from cold. She covered plants with burlap, tied it down with stones. Jacob found her at dawn, kneeling by a rose bush, her hands trembling as she secured cloth around its thorns. He dropped a wool blanket over her shoulders. She stiffened, then nodded once, her eyes on the ground. He walked away, his boots crunching frost. That night, they sat by a fire pit, embers glowing. She was across from him, her face half-shadowed. Silence wrapped them, heavy, but not unkind. She traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. Circles, lines, a shape like a sprouting seed. Jacob watched, his chest tight. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping. Went inside. The door closed hard. Weeks passed. The garden fought the cold. Green shoots defied the frost. Tomatoes swelled on vines. Hannah left a basket on the porch one morning. 3 tomatoes inside, their skins warm from the sun. Jacob took one, bit into it. Juice ran down his chin, sharp and sweet. He stood still, the taste pulling at something buried deep. He found her by the well that afternoon, staring at the cedar plank. Her fingers traced Clara's name. Slow, almost reverent. She didn't startle when he approached. He stood beside her, hands in pockets. The wind tugged at her hat's ribbon. She tucked it behind her ear. She pulled a small knife from her satchel, carved a line below the name, a curve, like a root breaking free. Stepped back, looked at him. His throat tightened. He nodded, once. Winter whispered closer. The garden slowed, its bounty stored or covered. Hannah's satchel grew lighter, her work nearing its end. She stood one morning at the path's edge, her hat in her hands. Jacob watched from the porch, his breath visible. His fingers closed around a tomato seed, saved from her basket. She turned to go, paused, looked back. He stepped forward, boots heavy, held out the seed, palm open. Her fingers brushed his, taking it. Her eyes held his, quiet, steady, like the valley itself. She walked away, her silhouette fading into the dusk. Jacob returned to the cedar plank. His knife traced a mark beside hers, a root, reaching deeper. The garden waited. Winter tightened its grip on the valley. Frost thickened on the cottonwoods, their branches stark against a steel-gray sky. The garden slept under straw and burlap, its rows barely visible. The house stood quiet, smoke curling thin from its chimney. Jacob rose before dawn, his breath visible in the cold. He stoked the fire, embers flaring briefly. His hands lingered on the mantel, where a small wooden horse stood, its paint chipped. Clara's gift to a child they never had. He turned away, pulled on his coat. Hannah returned at first light. Her satchel was lighter now, her work confined to checking the covered plants. She moved slower, her eyes scanning the earth as if reading its secrets. Jacob watched from the porch, his coffee tin cold in his hands. Her ribbon, frayed, danced in the wind. She knelt by the rosebush, adjusting burlap. Her fingers, red from cold, worked with care. A small shape moved near the fence. A boy, no older than 10, in a coat too big for his frame. His hair was matted, face smudged with dirt. He clutched a stick, dragging it through the frost. Hannah stilled, looked at him. He froze, eyes wide, ready to bolt. She reached into her satchel, pulled out an apple, its skin dull red, held it out. The boy hesitated, then stepped closer, took it, bit into it, juice dripping. He didn't run. Jacob's grip tightened on the tin. He stayed still. The boy came daily. Silent, wary, he lingered at the garden's edge. Hannah left apples, sometimes bread, by the fence post. He took them, never speaking. She worked on, humming her tune, softer now. The boy watched, his stick tracing shapes in the dirt, lines, curves, like her carvings. Jacob chopped wood, the axe's rhythm steady. He glanced at the boy, then at Hannah. Her hands moved with purpose, tying straw over a lavender bush. She didn't look at the child, but her humming grew clearer when he was near. One morning, the boy didn't come. Hannah paused by the fence, her eyes on the path. Her fingers brushed the post where his stick had scratched a circle. She left an apple anyway. It sat untouched, frost creeping over its skin. Jacob saw it from the porch. His jaw tightened. He went inside, the door shutting hard. Night fell early, stars sharp in the cold. Jacob sat by the fire pit, embers glowing. Hannah joined him, her blanket pulled tight. The silence was familiar now, less heavy. She traced a root shape in the dirt with her stick. He watched, his hands resting on his knees. A rustle broke the quiet. The boy stood at the garden's edge, shivering, his coat flapping. His eyes darted between them. Hannah rose, slow, and took the blanket from her shoulders. Walked to him. Draped it over him. He flinched but didn't run. She stepped back. Sat again. The boy stayed, clutching the blanket, his breath visible. Jacob stared into the fire. His fingers twitched, reaching for nothing. Days turned. The boy lingered closer, watching Hannah work. She showed him how to tie straw over plants, her hands guiding his. He mimicked her, clumsy, but earnest. She nodded, once. He stood taller. Jacob watched from the woodpile. The boy's coat sleeve was torn, his wrists thin. Jacob's axe paused mid-swing. He looked at the cedar plank by the well. Clara's name, a shadow. His chest ached, sharp. That evening, he left a pair of gloves by the fence, small, leather, patched, but warm. The boy found them at dawn, pulled them on, flexing his fingers, looked at the house. Jacob was on the porch, sharpening a knife. Their eyes met. The boy nodded, quick. Jacob turned back to his blade. Hannah carved more by the well. A sprouting seed beside Clara's name. The boy watched, his gloves too big on his hands. She handed him her knife, small and worn. Guided his grip. He scratched a wobbly line. A leaf, maybe. She nodded. He held the knife tighter. Jacob stood nearby, hauling water. His eyes lingered on the plank. The boy glanced at him, hesitant. Jacob set the bucket down. Walked over. Took the knife. Carved a root, deep and steady, beside the boy's mark. Stepped back. The boy stared, then nodded. Hannah's eyes met Jacob's. Quiet. Steady. The first snow fell, soft and relentless. Hannah worked through it, her hat dusted white. The boy helped, tying straw with gloved hands. They moved together, silent, their breaths mingling in the cold. Jacob watched from the porch, his coat unbuttoned despite the chill. He went inside, returned with a scarf. Clara's, wool, faded green. Walked to the boy. Draped it around his neck. The boy froze, then touched the fabric, his eyes wide. Hannah paused, her hands still in the snow. She looked at Jacob, her ribbon loose in her hair. He turned away, walked back to the house. Night brought a storm. Wind howled, rattling the windows. Jacob sat by the hearth, the wooden horse in his hands. A knock came. Faint. He opened the door. Hannah stood there, snow in her hair, the boy beside her, shivering under the blanket. Her eyes held a question. Jacob stepped aside. They entered. The boy stood by the fire, scarf tight around his neck. Hannah hung her hat by the door. Jacob set the horse on the mantel. No one spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the valley vanished under snow. Snow buried the valley, smoothing its edges to a soft blur. The house stood stubborn against the wind, its chimney smoke a faint thread in the gray dawn. The garden lay hidden, its life locked under frost and straw. Inside, the hearth glowed, casting long shadows. Jacob woke to the sound of wood creaking. Hannah knelt by the fire, feeding it kindling. The boy, curled on a blanket near the hearth, clutched Clara's scarf. His face, smudged with soot, was calm in sleep. Hannah's hands moved steady, her ribbon loose, hair catching the firelight. Jacob rose, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He set a kettle over the flames. Water hissed. Hannah glanced at him, her eyes quiet. She nodded once, returned to the fire. The boy stirred, opened his eyes, and froze, seeing Jacob. Sat up, scarf slipping to his shoulder. No one spoke. Jacob poured water into a tin mug. Set it near the boy. Walked outside. The cold bit his face. He shoveled snow from the path, his breath clouding. The cedar plank by the well was half buried. Clara's name, a faint scar. He brushed snow from it, his fingers lingering. The carved root, his, Hannah's, the boy's, stood sharp against the wood. Hannah emerged, her coat dusted white. She carried a spade, headed for the garden. The boy followed, his gloves too big, scarf trailing. They cleared snow from the burlap, their movements synchronized, silent. Jacob watched, shovel still in hand. His grip tightened. A horse's snort broke the quiet. A rider approached, bundled in furs, rifle slung across his back. Jacob straightened, his hand shifting to his own rifle, propped against the porch. The rider stopped, his face weathered, eyes narrow. He nodded toward the house. "Yours?" he asked, voice rough. Jacob nodded once. "Seen a boy? Runaway. Stole bread from the trader's post." Jacob's eyes flicked to the garden. The boy crouched behind Hannah, his hands still. She didn't turn, her spade slicing snow. "No," Jacob said. The rider stared, chewing tobacco, spat into the snow. "He's trouble. You see him, you bring him to town." Jacob didn't answer. The rider spurred his horse, disappeared into the white. Hannah worked on, her face unreadable. The boy stayed close, his eyes darting to the path. She handed him a stick, pointed to the straw. He tied it down, hands shaking. She rested a hand on his shoulder, brief. He steadied. Jacob chopped wood, the axe's rhythm sharp. His eyes kept to the horizon. The rider's words hung heavy, like damp snow. He split a log, the crack echoing. Hannah looked up, met his gaze. Her eyes held no question, only weight. She turned back to the garden. That night, the fire pit glowed outside. Hannah sat, her blanket tight. The boy huddled beside her, scarf around his neck. Jacob joined them, his shadow long. He tossed a log into the flames. Sparks rose, fading into the dark. The boy traced a line in the snow with his stick. A leaf, uneven. Hannah watched, her hands still. Jacob stared at the fire, his fingers curling into fists. "You got a name?" he asked, voice low. The boy froze, looked at Hannah, then Jacob. "Eli," he whispered. Jacob nodded. The fire cracked. Days blurred. The snow deepened, locking the valley in silence. Hannah and Eli worked side by side, checking plants, piling straw. Jacob watched from the porch, his coffee cold. He saw Clara in the boy's small hands, in Hannah's quiet care. His chest ached, a wound reopened. One morning, Hannah found a rabbit, frozen by the fence. She knelt, her fingers brushing its fur. Eli watched, his eyes wide. She dug a shallow grave with her spade, laid the rabbit inside, covered it with earth. Eli placed a stone on top, his gloves smudged. Jacob stood nearby, hauling water. He set the bucket down. Picked up a second stone, set it beside Eli's. The boy looked up, his face open for the first time. Hannah's eyes met Jacob's. She nodded. Faint. The rider returned at dusk, his horse's breath steaming. Jacob was on the porch, sharpening his knife. The man dismounted, his boots crunching snow. "Heard you got company," he said, eyes on the garden. Hannah and Eli were inside, the firelight flickering through the window. Jacob's knife stilled. "My business," he said. The rider spat, his gaze hard. "Traitor wants his thief. You hiding him? There's trouble." Jacob stood, knife in hand. His shadow fell across the snow. "No trouble here." The rider held his stare, mounted his horse, rode off. Night fell, the wind howling. Jacob sat by the hearth, the wooden horse in his hands. Hannah mended a tear in Eli's coat, her needle steady. Eli slept, curled by the fire. The scarf was folded beside him, green wool catching the light. Jacob's fingers traced the horse's chipped paint. He stood, set it on the table, looked at Hannah. Her needle paused. Her eyes held his, steady. like the valley after a storm. He stepped outside, the cold sharp, walked to the well. The cedar plank glowed faintly under moonlight. He touched the carved root, his breath catching. Clara's name felt lighter, not gone, but shared. Inside, Hannah hummed, soft. The tune carried through the door, weaving into the night. The valley lay locked in winter's grip, snow heavy on the cottonwoods. The house stood silent, its windows glowing faintly against the dark. The garden, blanketed in frost, held its breath. Inside, the hearth burned low, shadows dancing across the walls. Jacob sat at the table, his knife carving a small wooden shape, a bird, half-formed. Eli slept by the fire, Clara's scarf tucked under his cheek. Hannah mended a shirt, her needle glinting. Her hands moved slow, deliberate, but her eyes drifted to the window, where snow fell thick. She set the shirt down, stood, walked to the door, her coat in hand. Jacob's knife stilled. "Storm's heavy," he said, voice low. She nodded, her ribbon catching the firelight. "Garden needs checking." Pulled on her coat, stepped outside. Jacob watched the door close. The bird's wing, half-carved, splintered under his blade. Dawn came gray, the storm unrelenting. Hannah returned, snow crusted on her hat. Her hands were red, trembling as she warmed them by the fire. Eli stirred, sat up, his eyes on her. She handed him a cup of broth, steam rising. He took it, fingers brushing hers. Jacob stood by the window, his rifle propped nearby. Hoofbeats echoed, faint through the wind. 3 riders approached, their shapes blurred by snow. The first was the trader's man, his fur collar dusted white. The others carried rifles, faces hard. Jacob opened the door, cold air rushing in. Stepped onto the porch. His hand rested on the rifle's stock. "Got word," the lead rider said, spitting into the snow. "Boy's here. Hand him over." Jacob's jaw tightened. "No boy here." The rider's eyes narrowed. "Don't play, mister." Traders owed his due. Hannah appeared behind Jacob, her spade in hand. Eli crouched inside, hidden by the doorframe. Her gaze met Jacob's, steady. She stepped forward, her boots crunching snow. "He's gone," she said, voice quiet but firm. "Left days ago." The rider stared, his horse snorting. "You lying girl?" She didn't flinch, held the spade tighter. Jacob's hand shifted, fingers closing on the rifle. "You heard her." The riders exchanged glances. The lead man spat again. "We'll be back." They turned, vanishing into the storm. The house was quiet, the fire crackling. Hannah knelt by Eli, her hand on his shoulder. He shook, his eyes wide. She whispered something, too soft to hear. He nodded, clutching the scarf. Jacob stood by the window, watching the path. His fingers traced the broken bird in his pocket. He turned, looked at Hannah. "They'll come again." She met his gaze, nodded. "I know." He sat, the chair creaking. "Why'd you lie?" Her hand stilled. She looked at Eli, then the fire. "He's a child." Paused. "I was one too." Jacob's chest tightened. He waited. She pulled her sleeve up, faint scars crisscrossing her wrist. "Father's belt. After mother died." Her voice was even, like stating the weather. "Ran at 15. Never looked back." She covered the scars, picked up her needle, resumed sewing. Jacob's fingers dug into the bird's splintered wing. He stood, walked to the mantel, set the wooden horse beside Eli's blanket, went outside. Snow eased by noon. Hannah and Eli worked in the garden, clearing fresh drifts from the burlap. Their breaths mingled in the cold, their movements slow but sure. Jacob watched from the woodpile, axe in hand. He split a log, the crack sharp. A glint caught his eye. Metal, by the fence. He walked over, found a knife, small, rusted, half buried. Eli's, maybe. He pocketed it, his eyes scanning the horizon. The rider's tracks were faint, covered by new snow. Hannah approached, her spade over her shoulder. "He's scared," she said, glancing at Eli. "But he trusts you." Jacob's throat tightened. "Don't know why." She looked at the cedar plank, its carvings dusted white. "You gave him the scarf." He followed her gaze. Clara's name, the roots, the seed. His hand closed on the knife in his pocket. Was hers. Hannah nodded, her ribbon loose. She'd want it worn. He looked at her, sharp. Her eyes held no pity, only truth. He turned away, axe heavy in his hand. Night fell, stars piercing the cleared sky. The fire pit glowed, embers drifting. Hannah sat, her blanket shared with Eli. Jacob joined them, his shadow long. He tossed a log into the flames. The boy traced a leaf in the snow. His gloves smudged. Hannah hummed, soft, her tune weaving into the quiet. Jacob's fingers worked the broken bird, smoothing its edges. He glanced at Eli, then Hannah. "Where'd you learn that song?" She paused, her stick still. "Mother sang it. Before." Her voice was low, like a memory half buried. "Kept it." Jacob nodded. The fire cracked, warm against the cold. Eli looked up, his eyes on Jacob. "You got a song?" Jacob's hand stilled. He shook his head. "Lost mine." Hannah's gaze met his. Quiet. Steady. She resumed humming, softer now. The next morning, Hannah carved by the well. A new line, a leaf, curling upward. Eli watched, his knife in hand, mimicking her. Jacob stood nearby, hauling water. He set the bucket down. Took Eli's rusted knife from his pocket. Handed it to him. Eli's eyes widened. He took it, gripped tight. Carved a wobbly root beside Hannah's leaf. Stepped back, proud. Jacob's knife traced a new mark, a branch, reaching. He looked at Hannah. Her fingers brushed the plank, lingering on Clara's name. She nodded once. Dusk brought hoofbeats. Jacob stood on the porch, rifle in hand. The riders were back, 4 now, their lanterns casting harsh light. Hannah and Eli were inside, the fire low. Jacob's shadow stretched across the snow, unyielding. The lead rider dismounted, his rifle loose in his grip. "Last chance, mister." "The boy." Jacob's fingers tightened. "Told you. He's gone." The rider stepped closer, snow crunching. "We'll see." Hannah's spade scraped behind him. She stood in the doorway, her eyes like the valley, deep, unbroken. The fire inside flickered. Eli's scarf lay folded by the hearth. The valley lay still under a moonless sky, snow glowing faintly in the dark. The house stood resolute, its windows dim, the hearth's fire a mere pulse. The garden, shrouded in frost, waited like a held breath. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, their light cutting through the night. Jacob stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his shadow sharp against the snow. 4 riders halted at the path's edge, their horses snorting steam. The lead rider, the trader's man, held his lantern high, his face carved with intent. His rifle gleamed, slung low. "Time's up," he said, voice like gravel. "We know he's here." Jacob's fingers tightened on the stock. "Told you. No boy." Hannah stood in the doorway, her spade gripped tight. Eli crouched inside, his eyes wide, scarf clutched to his chest. The air was heavy, the cold biting. The rider dismounted, boots crunching. "Search the house," he told the others. Jacob stepped forward, rifle raised. "You don't." The riders froze, hands on their weapons. The lantern swayed, casting jagged shadows. Hannah moved beside Jacob, her spade a quiet threat. Her eyes met his, steady, unyielding. The lead rider spat. "You'll regret this." A shot rang out, sharp, splitting the night. The bullet grazed Jacob's arm, blood seeping through his coat. He didn't flinch. Raised his rifle, fired once. A rider's horse reared, the man tumbling into the snow. The others drew, but Hannah swung her spade, catching a second rider's arm. He cursed, dropping his gun. Jacob fired again, the shot wide, kicking up snow. The lead rider lunged, tackling him. They hit the ground, fists swinging. Jacob's knife flashed, slicing the rider's sleeve. Blood welled, dark against the white. Hannah pulled Eli inside, slammed the door, barred it. Her hands shook as she pushed a table against it. Eli's breath hitched, his knife, rusted, small, clutched tight. Outside, Jacob rolled, pinning the rider. His fist connected, bone crunching. The rider groaned, went limp. The others backed off, their lanterns dimming as they retreated into the dark. Jacob stood, blood dripping from his arm. Snow fell, soft, covering the tracks. Dawn broke, pale and cold. The valley was silent. The riders gone. Jacob sat on the porch, his arm bound with a torn cloth. Blood stained the snow at his feet. His rifle rested against the wall, barrel cold. Hannah emerged, her coat dusted with frost. She carried a bucket of water, set it beside him. Knelt, checked his bandage. Her fingers were steady, her touch light. She didn't meet his eyes. Eli followed, scarf loose around his neck. He held the wooden bird, its wing smooth now, finished in the night. He placed it on the porch rail, hesitant. Jacob looked at it, his throat tight. Nodded once. Hannah stood, walked to the garden. Cleared snow from the burlap, her movements slow, deliberate. Eli joined her, tying straw with gloved hands. Their shadows stretched long, blending into one. Jacob watched, his hand on the bird. His fingers traced its wing, the wood warm from Eli's grip. The cedar plank, by the well, stood clear. Snow brushed away. Hannah knelt beside it, her knife in hand. She carved a new mark. A branch, curling upward, joining the root and seed. Eli watched, his knife scratching a small leaf beside it. Jacob approached, his boots heavy. He took his knife, added a final curve. A flower. Simple. Open. He stepped back. Looked at Hannah. Her eyes held his. Quiet. Like the valley after a storm. Eli touched the plank, his gloved fingers lingering on Clara's name. The garden stirred beneath its frost. A green shoot, stubborn, broke through the snow. Spring crept in, slow and tentative. The valley softened, snow melting into rivulets that fed the creek. The garden woke, green unfurling under Hannah's hands. Tomatoes swelled. Beans climbed stakes. Eli worked beside her, his coat patched, scarf folded in his pocket. Jacob repaired the porch, his arms stiff but healing. He hammered nails, the rhythm steady. Hannah left a basket of early greens on the steps. He ate them, the taste sharp, alive. He carved another bird, smaller, and set it on the table beside the wooden horse. One evening Hannah sat by the fire pit, her humming soft. Eli traced shapes in the dirt, a root, a leaf, a flower. Jacob joined them, his shadow steady. He held out a seed, saved from last summer's tomatoes. Hannah took it, her fingers brushing his. She planted it in a small pot, her hands gentle. Eli watched, his eyes bright. "Will it grow?" he asked, voice low. Hannah nodded. "If we tend it." Jacob's chest ached, not with loss, but something new. He tossed a log into the fire. Sparks rose, fading into the dusk. Hannah's satchel sat by the door, lighter now. Her work was done, the garden alive. She stood at the path's edge, her hat in hand, ribbon loose in her hair. Eli stood beside her, his knife in his pocket, the scarf around his neck. Jacob watched from the porch, the wooden bird in his hand. He stepped forward, boots scuffing the earth, held out the bird. Hannah took it, her fingers steady. She smiled, faint, and tucked it into her satchel. Eli looked up at Jacob, his eyes wide. Jacob knelt, handed him the wooden horse. Eli's hands closed around it, tight. He nodded, quick. Hannah turned to the path. Eli followed, then paused. Ran back. Hugged Jacob. Brief. fierce. Jacob's hand rested on his shoulder, heavy, warm. They walked away, their silhouettes small against the valley. Jacob stood by the well, the cedar plank glowing in the sun. Clara's name held its place, joined by roots, leaves, a flower. He returned to the house. The garden bloomed, quiet, defiant. The pot with the seed sat on the windowsill, waiting for spring.